Last few times I tried to start the live stream, we had no sound. In today's video, we are going to be discussing how it is that you are paying the price to save monetary policy, and it's going to come with a whole lot of pain and suffering. Ultimately, the Federal Reserve was looking for and needed elevated inflation in order to save their monetary policy. And this is the unfortunate consequence of living in a fiat currency system with ever increasing amounts of new money that pours into the system and the need to stimulate the economy with the lowering of interest rates. Once the Federal Reserve got to the lower bound of zero, there was no longer an effective tool. All right, cool. Take three. Awesome. All right. And so when you think about what it is that the Federal Reserve truly needed to save their monetary policy, this is essentially it. What we are experiencing here in the economy right now is a of the Fed's policy. You have to have an interest rate that is elevated off the lower bound of zero if you are going to adjust that interest rate. When you're at the lower bound of zero, there is no adjustments of interest rates. There is no lowering it to stimulate the economy, and there's no even way of talking about lowering interest rates at the lower bound of zero because you just don't have the capability of doing it. So it was a desperate attempt to try and create an inflationary scenario in the Federal Reserve strategy before COVID. And this is important to understand because a lot of times people say, oh man, COVID just ran away, got inflation to run away, and it was out of control and nobody knew what was going on, and the Federal Reserve was very concerned about it. And, although that was what the mainstream media had put out there and what a lot of people were saying, and to try and argue against it is just, it's pretty much pointless. But the reality of the situation is the Federal Reserve had terms like opportunistic reflation. We discussed it so many times here on this channel, talking about how it is that the Federal Reserve was in a position in which that the inflationary expectation was persistently too low rather than too high. That was coming from John Williams. They actually created an entire document called the Makeup Strategy and how it is that they were going to use mainstream media narrative, how they were going to use music videos, Facebook posts, all kinds of appearances in areas in which that most people would not be looking at, like central bank information, ultimately like going out on things like The View, like on these particular talk shows in order to get the information out there to the public. Now, this was all part of the plan prior to COVID. And then when COVID kicked in, essentially broke down the supply chains and the inflationary scenario started running up incredibly high. That was a blessing to the Federal Reserve. They got to take that makeup strategy, close the book on it, set it on the shelf, and that thing is really kind of irrelevant at this point. We don't even need a strategy. Look at this. COVID scenario is taking care of business. Now, understanding that the pain from COVID that most people experienced being an actual blessing to the Federal Reserve is so mind-blowing to the people out there that they have no, they're like, they can't even, they can't even contemplate the idea of that. But that's the reality of the situation. And I've tried to share that many times here on this channel through the speeches and documents of the Federal Reserve, especially those that were taking place right before COVID. I mean, the monetary policy strategies for a low neutral interest rate world spells it out. I mean, completely spells it out for the people to like think about what happened and what it is that occurred for the Federal Reserve. The Fed even said it. It was just like, we are wanting a position in which inflation run extra long, extra hot for an extended period of time. To think that that is a purposeful thing that the Federal Reserve would want to do is absolutely out of the realms of possibilities for most people to understand. But when you think about what it is that occurred from that, it totally makes sense, right? Now we have a Federal Reserve who has an elevated interest rate that they can now communicate about the adjustment of it and have an actual impact on the economy. It's pretty funny how they can really talk about two different reasons for needing to move interest rates and have a profound impact on the economy. We recognize this here on this channel because we understand the credible threat theory, and that we listen to the words of the Fed and then we look at the market to see how they are reacting to it, because that's the monetary policy. You look at like things like mortgage rates coming down prior to the Federal Reserve adjusting rates. This is when they had peaked out, they had stayed elevated for a while, and then they promised that they were going to be lowering them in the future. They didn't say by how much, but they did say that they were going to be lowering them. That promise to lower interest rates into the future took mortgage rates to their lowest level that we have seen since they peaked out, and they haven't returned back to that level. Then the Fed started cutting. After that, the mortgage rates went up. Now, understanding how it was that future expectation of the interest rate cut that had the profound impact on mortgage rates is absolutely the key in the heart of understanding how the credible threat theory operates. Once you see it, once you recognize it, now you can then look at it in a much different fashion. They need the inflation expectation. Why? To keep the elevated and to keep the elevated interest rates. By keeping the elevated interest rates, they have the ability to talk about and communicate about the interest rate adjustment. At the lower bound, that wasn't a tool. So recognizing that as the tool and not the interest rate adjustment itself, because everybody else is focused in on the interest rate adjustment itself. In fact, they say that the Federal Reserve is reacting to the market. That is the most incorrect way of looking at it I have ever seen. Like everything that I have read within the Federal Reserve's documents, within their own speeches, within their strategies, and everything that they're talking about, that is not the case. They are not reacting to the markets. The markets are definitely reacting to the Federal Reserve and what it is that they are expecting the Federal Reserve to do into the future based on the communications that the Federal Reserve has delivered, or else they wouldn't know anything about the Fed. Everything they know about the Fed has communicated. I hope people understand that there was a time when the Federal Reserve was so secret, so quiet, so misunderstood, and like esoteric in understanding of how the strategy worked, that the media would literally look at the size of the briefcase of Alan Greenspan to determine whether or not there was going to be an interest rate adjustments. That is how they understood the Federal Reserve, was by a briefcase size. So to understand that they have developed over the years a very thorough and deliberate way of communicating. With using that very thorough and deliberate way of communicating, they can adjust interest rates within the markets. We've seen that prior to the Federal Reserve lowering interest rates when we saw the mortgage rates coming down. We saw mortgage rates and other interest rates moving up again prior to the Federal Reserve actually raising rates because of the promise of raising rates into the future. They said it. We are going to raise rates into the future. And the mortgage rates and everything else started moving up. The Fed started ticking rates up, and mortgage rates peaked out, and the Federal Reserve kept raising. Right? They weren't working in lockstep with each other. And this is important to understand because the markets react to what it is that they think that the Federal Reserve is going to do. And so they put that information out there. See, the Fed can talk about two different ways of going about it. Like they could go and say, hey, we got this inflationary scenario that we're going to have to deal with. And then they communicate very much about that inflationary scenario and how it is that they are going to adjust interest rates based on the inflationary scenario. And then people are like, oh man, they're going to have to raise rates because of this inflationary scenario because they communicated so much about the inflation being the concern. And then one day they go like, blip, and they go over and they start talking about the labor. And they're like, oh man, we got to support labor. All this communication and mainstream media narrative about labor. Right? And then all of a sudden you start seeing the rates coming down because everybody believes that the Federal Reserve is going to have to lower rates to deal with the labor market. So you see how the communication has literally been divided. If you want to raise interest rates, talk about inflation. If you want to lower interest rates, talk about labor. And then the reality to the market start to take place. See, this is the difference inside of it. Nobody's going to explain this to you. And it's, you know what's funny about this is that this is from, I'm sorry, I didn't say the document. I will go and find it, and I will put it in the links in the description of this video. Once I have it uploaded, I will share a document with you that explains exactly that. on how communicating about inflation will have an interest rate impact, and talking about labor will have an interest rate impact. And deciding on which one of those you want to use for the profound impact that you want on the market's perception in order to adjust the rates in the broader economy. Again, it's a communication style. If you, I know that seems so backwards for a lot of people, but think, this is not me making this up. This is the Federal Reserve talking about how they use their strategy to other central bankers. And I'm sorry I didn't leave that link down in the description before I started the video. I will get it and I will leave it there for you. It's once you see this, once you understand it, it's like it's almost impossible to see it any other way. Okay? And then you start looking at things like tariffs and you're wondering, okay, so how is it that these tariffs are actually creating an inflationary scenario? Like there's promise that the tariffs aren't doing the inflation, but yet the inflation expectations of the people is quite elevated on account of it. Inflation expectations is a self-fulfilling prophecy. People behave in a way that starts to create the inflationary scenario. And so depending on how it is that people have received the information about tariffs and whether or not they're going to create an inflationary scenario or, destroy the economy or whatever it is, people start to react to that particular information. And then you start to see this profound change take place within the economy. Now, something I find very interesting about this is that although the Supreme Court has allowed the tariffs to continue to operate, there's a very, very high, very likely possibility, in fact, it's probably more likely than not, that these things are going to be illegal. And that all this is going to be like, nope, sorry, I can't do it anymore. And it all has to be unwound. Now, whether or not the corporations have filed the protest properly and that they're going to get all the refunds and all that other stuff, I guess that's a whole other story to talk about when that moment comes. But at this time, people are not taking into consideration that these things are illegal. Nobody, like literally nobody does. Every single article I have ever read essentially talks about how these things are going to be persistent going into the future and that there's no chance of them being deemed illegal. And I think to myself, man, that is the gold machine at its finest, right? Like if you were to invent a gold machine, like let's just say, and many people have heard this analogy before. If you had a gold machine, let's just say that you were super smart and you're a scientist, you came up with this machine that could produce as much gold at will with very little cost or energy, right? Let's just say that this thing existed, like you could figure it out. And now like you don't have the machine, but you figured out how to create this thing, right? And you have it scientifically verified and proven, and then it was widely publicized that you can make this machine. What do you think would happen to the price of gold? It would plummet, right? I mean, people are thinking, holy crap, this guy's going to produce all this gold at will with very little cost or energy. The price of gold would plummet. Now, people's reaction to the news has a very profound impact on the economy. This tariff scenario is like the ultimate gold machine. I mean, it really is. Once, like, if it was to be deemed illegal, what if? But it's a huge what if, and I get that part, but it seems very much like it's going to be like what the case is. I mean, from the things that I have read on it in research, I'm not saying that the tariff or that the administration doesn't have a plan to, which they've already said that they do. But ultimately, the idea of the tariff itself has more of an impact on the economy and more of a profound, lasting impact on the economy than I think anybody is giving it consideration for if it was to not happen. Like, these partnerships are shifting now. They don't like just go back. They're like, oh, the tariffs are illegal. Okay, hey, man, I'm sorry. Let's do that deal like we were doing before. It doesn't go back. And this is important to understand because without this particular gold machine, the tariffs, the credible threat of tariffs, none of this stuff would be possible. The expectation of elevated inflation, raising that neutral interest rate, making the Federal Reserve in a position in which that the elevated Fed funds rate are less restrictive to the economy than anybody had given it consideration for. That is something that is so hard. So difficult for a lot of people to wrap their heads around. Like, it's hard enough just to understand the Fed funds rate. Then to think that the Fed funds rate has a neutral position in which they are neither accommodating nor restricting the economy. It's when they are neutral. And that neutral interest rate doesn't hold a position that is easily viewable in real time. People can have estimates of it. They can get their best guess. They can say, hey, if you remove the inflationary scenario out of the equation, the Fed funds rate would be neutral at this position. Then you add the inflationary scenario to it, and the Fed funds rate would have to be above that in order to be restrictive. And then the inflationary scenario becomes persistent into the future, and it starts raising that neutral position. And the Federal Reserve finds themselves far less restricted in the economy than anybody had given it consideration for. Again, like that, I just stated it twice, and again, people will probably have missed it, but then wonder why it is that the rich elitist out there, or even just like people who are doing fairly well in the top 20% of household income, seem to be just killing it and doing so well. And then the rest of the people are in this painful experience. And it seems so confusing. Like, why is this? And then you read, like, in the comments, it would be like, well, they did this to you on purpose, right? You know, this is how they imprison you, and this is all the conspiracy stuff. And it's not really that even that conspiratorial. I mean, there's kind of a reality to that, but then there's also a reality that says, you know, you can escape all that, and you don't have to serve that prison sentence like you think you do. Like, the Federal Reserve was in prison. They were imprisoned by the lower bound of zero. They don't have that anymore. They're not imprisoned by that anymore. But it seems that you're experiencing the prison, right? They enslaved you into the inflation. But not all of you are enslaved in inflation. Some of you are actually benefiting from this inflation, and your asset prices are going up, and you actually have a purchasing power that's increasing, and you're spending that money into the economy, increasing the consumption. But it's only a handful of you who are doing it. Understanding that this is done on purpose, or this is the understanding that the natural consequences of new money coming into the system drives a wedge between the rich and the poor, and this is what it looks like. You can blame the corporations, you can blame the government, you can blame the banking system, you can blame all these people on injecting new money into the system, but ultimately the people begged for it. They said the government just should, ought to, could. Right? And all those things said, all right, well, I'll tell you what we're going to do is we're just going to print up a bunch of money and we're going to shove it into the system. And doesn't that sound real nice? And the people said, yeah, it sure does. Because they didn't protest. They didn't stop it. They actually begged for more of it. And then what ended up being the result? A lot of inequality. And they say, hey, you know, all that new money that you printed up that we actually begged for, it's created a lot of problems and pain and suffering for the people down at the end of the line. Do you think you might be able to do something about that? And they're like, no, not at this point. You know, you should have thought about that back when, you know, back in the day, you know, before you actually asked the government to do something. Because there was a moment there that we could have kept our standard of living from rising. But we wanted a higher standard of living. In fact, we bragged it up. The highest standard of living in the world. Isn't this awesome? Everybody go and enjoy the high standard of living. And then there went your manufacturing jobs, and people go like, whose fault is that? And they're like, well, mine. I mean, I just wanted a new car, new house, new TV, new clothes, new stuff, all this. I mean, that's not too much to ask. All the new stuff? That's not too much to ask, is it? I mean, come on, I'm an American. But, you know, you're telling me I can't have my job now, too? It's like, well, you know, I mean, you could have had your job if you were not like wanting the nice, beautiful stuff in your life, because this is the natural consequence of it. It's quite unfortunate. And I watch it take place, and I see people like just begging for something to happen, begging for there to be a change. And then they get mad at me, saying that like I'm some sort of like, you know, just trying to support the corporations or do something like that. And I'm like, I don't know where that comes from. I don't buy new stuff. I'm sitting in a brand new Toyota, but it's not mine, it's my dad's. I drive a 97 Suburban. I have an old couch that I bought used. In fact, all my furniture is used. I didn't buy any of it new. My life, I try to keep as low on the expenses as possible, and then I try to position myself in a way that then has something in the future, some sort of return, whether it's an asset or a dividend paying stock or working on the house or doing something in that way, because I understand that if I don't position myself that way, then I can expect that the inequality that I would face would continue to, continue to grow. There's like no doubt in my mind that would be the case. And so when I understand it for that sense, and then I think about it, yeah, it really is. People want to enjoy the luxurious experience, and by enjoying that luxurious experience, the pain and suffering will come from it. There's very little doubt in my mind. And now as I watch how it is that the Federal Reserve literally saved their monetary policy, it's just like, man, talk about creating pain and suffering for 80% of the people out there. And like, it's not like they didn't even know they were going to do it. Like, they knew that they were going to do it. That's like the worst part about it for people to really like internalize is that by blaming the Federal Reserve on the inflationary scenario, they literally created the power that the Fed needed them to needed in order to save their policy. And when I explain this to people, they get so upset with me. They get so mad. And I'm thinking it's not me, right? I mean, I'm trying to say it. I'm trying to share it with you guys that the Federal Reserve promised pain and suffering into the future. They knew it was going to take place, and they said that if they didn't do this to you, it was going to create pain and suffering for all. Now, to know that that is the exact same thing that Cantillon described back in his essay that he wrote hundreds of years ago, it isn't surprising. It's not surprising. This is the way it goes down. Massive inequality is a result of ever increasing amounts of new money that comes into the system. Now, whether you get that from a silver mine, you get it from massive production of the world's greatest stuff and sending that stuff out there to the world, or you're going deep into debt with government debt issuance, the new money coming into the system has the same results. It separates the rich from the poor every single time. Powell's speech that was delivered August of 2020, August 27th of 2020, it said it straight up, right? The decline in the assessment of the federal, or I'm sorry, where are my glasses? The decline in assessments of the neutral Fed funds rate has a profound implication for monetary policy. This is back in August of 2020. This is before COVID. He's talking about the neutral interest rate being a major issue for him. With interest rates generally running close to their effective lower bound, even in good times, right? After the great financial crisis, the Federal Reserve was operating at essentially zero interest rate policy. The effective lower bound is zero. The Fed has less scope to support the economy during an economic downturn by simply cutting the Fed funds rate, right? Out of ammunition. They don't have it. It doesn't work for them anymore. That's what I tried to share with people, is that the Federal Reserve didn't have an interest rate setting policy tool. They had something else. The results can be worse economic outcomes in terms of both employment and price stability, with the cost of such outcomes likely falling hardest on those least able to bear them. They know that it's going to be painful. The persistent undershoot of inflation from our 2% long-run objective is a cause for concern. Many find it counterintuitive that the Fed would want to push up inflation. Some find it counterintuitive. Hell, for the previous few years, some people didn't even think you could do it. Didn't even think it was possible. Quantitative easing 1, 2, 3, and 4 failed to produce an inflationary scenario that the Fed was looking for. I mean, this is 2020 that Jerome Powell is speaking about how it is that they were desperate for inflation. It's been running persistently below the 2% target, interfering with their policy. After all, low and stable inflation is essential for a well-functioning economy. Absolutely. Everybody talks about it. Why not have zero inflation, right? Low inflation is good for the economy. Everybody knows that. High inflation sucks for the economy. And this is going back to Powell's speech, and we are certainly mindful that higher prices for essential items such as food, gasoline, and shelter add to the burdens faced by many families. Yeah, those three things, right? Food, energy, and the place to live. These particular things are the most costly things for the average everyday person. I mean, this is pretty much where everybody spends their money, right? Is on food, their house, and trying to get back and forth to work. And this is the majority of the people. And when you start creating an inflationary scenario, or at least hoping or wishing and dreaming and praying for one, like Jerome Powell is in this speech prior to COVID, prior to the inflationary scenario, when you are wishing and hoping and dreaming, you are wishing and hoping and dreaming for pain and suffering upon the people because you know exactly where it's going to happen. That's what Jerome Powell is saying. Now, we knew it. We knew it ahead of time. He clearly stated it. People didn't want to believe it, right? However, right? Those are for especially struggling with lost jobs and incomes. Okay. However, inflation that is persistently too low poses serious risk to the economy. No, wait a minute. Hold on. Everybody else is already at risk, right? Because they don't make any money and they're barely cutting it as it is. And every single time you have a little bit of inflation, it's creating a massive amounts of pain for a whole group of people out there. It's a little bit of an inconvenience for the top, right? Like, they're like, oh man, look at how the prices went up. That's a bummer, but they still buy the same stuff, right? It's not like they cut back on anything. If you don't have the money to buy the food, you get to starve. You don't get to eat, right? You get to choose whether or not you're going to show up for work, put gas in the tank, or if you're going to go and buy something to eat. And that's a burden that many families face. And the Fed was well aware of it. They knew it. They were desperate to try and get their inflation, so they were going to create pain and suffering for the people. They said it ahead of time. They needed it. This is August of 2020, before the inflation, before the COVID. However, inflation that is persistently too low can pose serious risks to the economy. Basically, the rich people would suffer. Because you already suffer. You're just going to suffer a little bit more. We don't want the rich people to suffer, right, pal? That's another way of saying that, right? However, inflation that is persistent. Okay, inflation that runs below its desired level can lead to unwelcome fall in long-term inflation expectations, which in turn can pull actual inflation even lower, resulting in an adverse cycle of ever lower inflation and inflation expectations. You see how big of a problem this was? It was a huge problem for the Federal Reserve, not fighting inflation. And it wasn't just this speech. 20 years earlier, there was another speech, 1917, 18 years earlier, there was another speech delivered by Ben Bernanke talking about deflation and how to prevent it from ever recurring. Like preventing deflation, that's the concern. Here it is. Jerome Powell's going like, we got to figure out an inflationary scenario, and I'm sorry, it's going to cause a lot of pain and suffering for the people at the end of the line. But, however, if we don't do it, it'll cause some serious risks to the broader economy. So guess what? The lower class, you're going to have to suffer some pain and misery in order to save monetary policy. Are you guys willing to put up with it? All right. It's going to be, here it comes. All right. And then the inflation comes and people start blaming the Federal Reserve for creating an inflationary scenario. And the Federal Reserve was like, yeah, we're bad. We're really bad. Sorry about that. A lot of pain and suffering for the lower income household earners. Sucks to be you guys. But yet, it occurred. To prevent this outcome and adverse dynamics that could ensue, our new statement indicates that we will seek to achieve inflation that averages 2% over time, and therefore, following periods when inflation has been running persistently below 2%, appropriate monetary policy will likely aim to achieve inflation moderately above 2% for some time. So when that started to happen after this speech, and people said that the Fed lost control and that inflation was running away from them, and I'm thinking to myself, what in the world are you guys talking about? This is exactly what the Fed was hoping for. Like, inflation at 6, 7, 8, that might have been a lot, but it wasn't too much for the Fed, right? It was like, okay, well, we weren't going to go that. Like the Fed's makeup strategy was going to be slightly above 2% for a while. Whether it was a while or if it was just a short amount of time with an extreme amount of inflation, the results were the same. That's the important part to understand. The results were the same. Whether they did it on purpose or accident, they got what they wanted. It was an outcome of elevated inflation, inflation expectations, and a raising of the neutral interest rate. Boom. This speech described it. And it's not only this speech. I mean, we've done other speeches. I just like this one because it literally comes from the horse's mouth that he was going to create this pain and suffering upon the people. And then when it happened, they started blaming him for it, saying, "Oh, look what you're doing. You're causing pain and suffering." And they're like, "Yeah, we know. We know. We're trying to save our monetary policy." I mean, were you not listening when we said it? I mean, here Jerome Powell is saying it. We are going to create a situation in which that there will be pain and suffering upon the people in order to raise the inflation expectation and pull the neutral interest rate off the lower bound of zero that is interfering with their monetary policy. That is what is occurring today. Now, if you go back and you look at Ben Bernanke's speech talking about how to prevent deflation, he says when things run out of capabilities with interest rate adjustments, you can use your words, creating the gold machine. Think about the tariffs. Tariffs are like the ultimate gold machine. It's like how much selling of the supply chain partnerships and reconnecting of the distribution networks is now taking place based on this credible threat. It's huge. And this is how it is that the administration is in, essentially cahoots with the Federal Reserve. When you think about the outcome that is resulting from it, don't think about the words that they are using. That part is so like I don't know. It is just like it is so much like the propaganda of information that they need the massive of people to then internalize and think about in order for them to conduct their ways. If you can observe that ball, if you can observe that part of things, you would get a whole different perspective on how monetary policy is operating. When you think about Jerome Powell and Donald Trump being best of buds and creating this exact, exact economy that they were looking for, elevated inflation and inflation expectations, right? Like you think about it, it was just like Trump's gone is like, I'm in office here, man. Hold my beer, give me that mic. I'm gonna show you guys a show here. I'll be right back. And he goes out and he starts blasting the economy apart with these ideas of tariffs and everything else that is going on here. Look at what happened to the inflationary scenario. Look at what happens to the neutral interest rate. Think about what it is that the Federal Reserve was saying that they were facing as far as their problem prior to what it is that we are experiencing here today. What we are experiencing today is a lot of pain and suffering upon the people, like Jerome Powell said was going to happen years before it occurred, and not even years before it occurred, but essentially just before it occurred, right? Literally spelling it out, saying it, and then here Donald Trump is delivering it. I don't know how many other people can see it this way. And I know that it's very difficult for them to see it this way because they really haven't internalized an idea like the credible threat theory that was literally developed here on a working class economics channel by breaking down the Federal Reserve's own documents. And this is the results of what you get from it, is this particular theory. It's way different from everybody else's, but mine is proven time and time again to be the most accurate one because it's literally developed from the Federal Reserve's own words. Not one that they said they screwed up, not one that says Donald Trump is in control, not one that says everything is run by some elitist group that nobody can see or even know who's out there. This is literally being delivered from their own FOMC, the people who are talking about monetary policy and delivering the monetary policy. It's their own words to the other central bankers that I am using. Nobody else is doing this like this. Literally nobody. And it gets difficult. I understand. It's like it gets so deep to try and understand all these parts and pieces. But the more we break it down, the more we talk about it, the more we go back through these speeches, look at what they said that they were looking for, wanted, and needed for the future, and then seeing it delivered. Yeah. Man, I think we got this stuff dialed in. Let's read through some comments. I'm 35 minutes into this. All right. Let's cruise it back up here a little ways. Wow, look at all these comments. Okay. Let's just go right to this one here. Putting faith in God first, and He will give us the guidance we need through His Holy Spirit and faith in Jesus. All right. $39 gold year 1970. Thanks, High IQ reporting. Know that Jesus loves you. All right. The Bible is faith. Read that and have faith. Wayne, okay. Oh, I wanted to ask about silver. I saw something that said the solid state battery Samsung will use a lot of silver. Well, I've heard a lot about this in the about silver and what it is that's going to happen with silver. Hold on 1 second. And what's going to end up happening with the silver when it goes into all this technology that's coming in the future, solar panels, lots of, these batteries, all the different AI stuff that's going to happen with robotics and whatever. I've heard so much about that. It just really, it's hard to believe that it's finally going to happen. But it very well could. It could reach that tipping point in which that the demand for silver to go into all these components finally outstrips the available supply, which they have been saying has been taking place for a long time. Now, I've been sitting around waiting for that to happen, but it doesn't really seem to occur. And now here it is. It looks like there's evidence of it starting to take place, and people are getting super excited about it. I'm not The silver manipulation game has been playing out for a very long time, and if you get a crashing economy, you're going to find a ton of working class people out there who have bought a lot of silver, and if it's elevated, they're going to start dumping it out there to start paying their bills just like everybody else would. Now, I think about who it is that I know who has silver and what it is that they were planning on doing with it. It was never in the ideas that they were going to use it to try and pay bills if they ever had an economic downturn taking place. But I'm only assuming that's what's going to end up happening because that's usually ends up being what happens is people get desperate. Everybody gets desperate. Right? If you're hungry, you will be and you have an ounce of gold and nothing else, and you are starving. You will drop that ounce of gold immediately for something to eat. Right? Like if you are starving and you are at the end, like you will get very desperate. And that's an unfortunate consequences of the human being is that we do get desperate at times. If you haven't had food for a long time, you haven't drank water for a long time, you will do just about anything because it's survival at that point. You are going to die. All right, what would you rather have? And so when it gets down to that point, then it gets very hard to hold on to something and say, oh no, man, I'm not going to give up any of this stuff, even though I'm dying here, right? So understanding how bad it can really get, and that silver starts coming out of the woodwork because it was really amazing to me when I saw it back in 2011 run up to $50 an ounce, how many people I knew started showing up with silver. And I was like, man, I didn't know you had, like, they were like, hey, man, you want to buy? You want to buy? Like, they were just showing up because they saw how high it had gotten. And they were willing to unload this silver. And I was like, holy moly, I talk about this stuff all the time. And now all of a sudden you're showing up with it. That's what I end up thinking is going to take place, or at least for a short time until all that silver is unloaded, and then what happens, right? So basically, like 5,000 years of mining silver, there's a lot of it out there in the hands of the people themselves. Let's see here. The other scam is all about trickle down, that a bunch of asset appreciation metrics show good economy, but none of that goes to wage earners. No, James, that's all made up like human belief that they can control the economic forces that are out there. It's very illogical that they can figure that out. Most understanding of economics, it falls on a a very improper location of belief of power, and that's the politics of it. Politics are the results of economics, and I know that's very difficult for a lot of people to internalize and wrap their heads around. And it's cool. Like this is something I'm gonna try and share a little bit differently with people because I try to get politics out of it, and you'll see economics a whole lot differently. And then people get real mad at me and they say, "Oh no, you have to include the politics and you have to." And I'm thinking, no, you really don't, you can include politics after you see the economic forces to understand why it is that they are reacting the way they are. Like you can use it almost as a symptom of the underlying economic forces that are playing out. Like even the idea of tariffs. Just take the idea of tariffs. The only reason why they even have tariffs is because the underlying economic forces are now creating a situation that is destroying the economy. So now they have to inflict tariffs in order to try and prevent this from occurring. And now they can't prevent it. They can't prevent it. They can't bring manufacturing back. That was an economic force underlying that sent the manufacturing out of the United States. And can we blame politics for it? Absolutely. Can you blame Rich for it? Sure. But can you look back in history and see an explanation of it written down hundreds of years ago from a guy called Cantillon who said that if you have a manufacturing base that increases their standard of living, you will not be able to compete and you will lose your manufacturers. The United States had the highest standard of living. What do you think was going to happen to the manufacturers? Of course they were going to leave. They were going to go find somebody else who didn't have a high standard of living. And then you want to say, oh, it's greedy corporations' fault. And it would be like, no, it's an underlying economic force. Greedy corporations are the symptoms. That's the symptoms of it. And so when you turn around, you say, oh, it's their fault. And you'd be like, then you totally miss the underlying economic force. Because that's what's going on. So once you separate it, then you can put them back together again and say, this is what's going on. If you try to use the politics and say, they're the reasons, they're the ones, they're 100% in control, and that's all that, you will never, ever, ever be able to understand the Cantillon effect because it doesn't play that way. Right? Even Cantillon says it's better to dismiss the politics out of it because it interferes with the understanding. Once you get that part, once you see that, then you can bring the politics back into it and say, this is the reason why they're reacting to it. They're more of the symptom. In fact, it's better to be in politics that way because then you can see so much of the symptoms out there. You can recognize it. You can say every time a politician acts this way, there's this going on inside of the underlying economic forces that's created the situation that is now making them behave this way. You think about it. You had to be industrious first before anybody could come and try and govern you. If you weren't doing anything, they can't go like a bunch of bitch men come up and say, okay, now go to work. It's like, go screw yourself, man. You had to be industrious first. You had to have the drive and the want and the desire to go out there and try and earn more, produce more, create more, be better, learn more, right? All those things. And by becoming industrious yourself, you increase your standard of living. By increasing your standard of living, now you put yourself in a very competitive position. Now, one, you've learned a lot, gained a lot of skills, understand a lot, but then you also have put yourself in a position in which that somebody else who doesn't have the high standard of living that you have by you raising your elevated life from all the understanding and awesomeness that you have created, now you got somebody else who's going to compete against you. Says, I don't have all that stuff. I can earn a whole lot more, and I think I might be able to do your job. Maybe not as good at first, but I'll get better. Right? That's economic forces that are at play. Go get mad at that dude. Get mad at yourself for having elevated your standard of living. Which one are you going to get mad at? Are you going to get mad at this dude who's trying really hard to take your job from you? I mean, why are you getting mad at him for it? You got the job, right? I mean, it sucks that if he gets it from you, but if he ends up doing it cheaper and better than you can, then why do you deserve it? Right? It's unfortunate economics. I know it doesn't sound right. It sounds very upsetting to somebody. They might be very like, oh, dude, that isn't fair. I mean, like, yeah, you're right. There's nothing in this world that is fair. And if that dude can do it cheaper and faster and better and everything else, then you're out the game. And this is exactly why the manufacturers leave a particular nation. It's because there's somebody else out there who's going to do it cheaper. They may not do it as good at first, but they'll get better. Right? Give them time. 177 people watching with 71 likes. Thank you so much. I will still call them the originators of the money. Yep. Can underlying economic forces explain marriage as well? Because I lost a ton and I wasn't even married in relationships. Well, this is the thing. Yeah, it kind of really does. Economics really does explain a lot of that as well, because you have to think back in the day, before a lot of people could have the ability to earn money in just about any different way you want. Like, I think about all the different ways that I can earn money now, or even my kids can earn money. That was different from when I was a kid. Like, if I wanted to earn money, I had to physically go and mow a lawn or chop wood, or, go do something out there to try and trade time for dollars. But now kids can figure out how to do online things and make money, and it's really strange, but that's the way it occurs. So, understanding that the ability to acquire my buddy Ryan's on there. He's like, dude, it's gonna hit $100 an ounce. Yeah, right on, man. I'm glad you're watching. Um, but but when you think about what it is that people are doing to try and acquire what it is that they need to sustain their life, it's become so much easier now for people to do that, right? Like, you think about it, even nowadays, the amount of women who are getting degrees is outpacing men. So if you are smart and have a career and have a job and you have all the ways of supporting yourself, then you're not going to really be relying on anybody else out there. And this is an unfortunate thing for the human being. Right? And now it's great for the individual person, but it's bad for the human being race, right? Because the individual person can live like a decent outcome. They get to buy a house or get the retirement or whatever, and whether you're male or female, that's a good thing. To have that kind of position in your life to be able to do something like that. But it's terrible for a relationship, because generally, when you look back through history, women will be dependent on men. And now, in order for that to be the case, men would have to be very good at providing, meaning that they would not only have to provide for themselves, but then for an entire family as well. And so having a man being able to be in that position in which that they can provide not only for themselves, which is very difficult because everybody is providing for themselves nowadays, and that ain't special, then you have nothing to really offer up, except for trying to be some really awesome, magnificent dude who's 6'3", got millions of dollars in the bank, built like, like just Iron Man, got all the, like, you're standing out in all these absolute incredible ways, and then you realize that is less than half of 1% of one of the entire nation is ever even going to be remotely close to that. Women have lost the ability to then be able to pick out a unique dude, because, like, essentially they're all like them. Like, what is it that these guys out there would able to do in order to stand out and say, hey, I can provide. I can be a provider that says I can protect and provide everything that we need for this entire life. And by having that, that's what's attractive to women, because that's the natural instinctual behavior throughout the primitive life of human beings from caveman days to today, is that that's the natural feeling of energy you want to be in. Masculine divine and feminine divine, right? Masculine behavior is protective and, and providing and all the other stuff with it. And if that's not unique, then there's nothing to stand out. There's no attraction that's going to take place within that. Like, there might be some quick physical attraction that will happen, like you like each other or whatever, but the actual deep rooted connection that provides that long lasting standing relationship comes from feminine and masculine energy dynamics. And that if you are not carrying those in a very profound way, it makes it very difficult to operate going into the future. Because the moment that somebody can trigger that feeling in the female or the male, right, that opposite nature, that feminine energy that triggers that masculine energy, then that's what's going to end up being attractive. And if you're not carrying those two independently in this relationship, then it's going to be very hard. So again, as women are becoming more successful and being able to provide, it makes it very difficult for themselves. It makes it difficult for a man to be able to stand out and say, look how unique and awesome I really am. Because that's what it takes for a man to be attractive. They have to be very outstanding. They can't just, women just get to be. Right? That's what's awesome about, like, I know it's difficult in their own sense and all the other stuff, but essentially women just get to be. They don't have to really prove themselves in any other way other than being nice and sweet and encouraging and gentle and, all the other kind of things that go with it that, basically isn't disrupting the life of the man. And I know that sounds really, like, I don't know, you want to call it toxic masculinity or whatever, but that's just the case of it. Just look throughout history, and that's the way they generally operate, is that women want to be the nurturer in the house, taking care of those things, and the guys are out there busting their ass trying to provide and make things happen. And that's usually the energy that works. But if it's not, if you're like, oh no, we're gonna force a new way and just make it different, and it was just like, okay, so now everybody's equal, and then wondering why it is that we don't have this separation with the energy dynamics, which needs to occur in order for a proper relationship to take place. Oh no, let's eliminate that. There is no energy dynamic difference. And okay, and then you don't, what do you expect? Failure, right? That's what would come from it. Because if you don't have the two, if you don't have those opposite poles, then you're going to have a very difficult time operating, because there's going to come a time out there somewhere it's going to get triggered within that relationship. And somebody's going to be like, well, you don't trigger the feminine energy, me, and that dude does. And boom, they're out they go. Right? Or same thing with the other. It was just like, yeah. Have you ever noticed, like, I don't know why we're talking about this, but have you ever noticed, like, when women cheat, they cheat on men that they don't love. Men will cheat on women they absolutely love. It is the craziest thing. Like, I mean, absolutely, like, don't have anything against, like, they just absolutely love this woman, and they will still cheat on her. It's the strangest thing in the world, right? And you wonder why. What is it that's going on? Deep, like, can't you control yourself? And it was just like, there's this deep rooted, primitive, instinctual thought and behavior that is down in there. And if you don't recognize what is going on, then you might fall victim to it. Just like the breaking up of a relationship because we didn't understand that there's supposed to be a feminine, masculine dynamic taking place within it. And if you try to eliminate those things, or you try to hide from it, or you try to like pretend like they don't exist, then you can also expect that it's probably not going to work. Yeah. All right. Enough with the relationships. What do I know? All right. Women want a man with six figures, but cheat with broke ass dudes. Um, women, women are attracted to feelings. They're not. They're like, that's what it comes down to. They're attracted to dudes who know how to manage feelings. Uh, let's move on to something else. Let's go back into economics. I left because I was being less of a man. My money was not the same. I was losing instead of gaining. If it, if you are on a path and you are acquiring and you are building and you are pursuing and you are on that, and the woman doesn't find that part of you attractive, then just hang out and have friends, right? But if she finds that part of you attractive and she is wanting to support and encourage that part, not saying something like, are you going to go and are you going to go and pursue that business again today? Aren't you going to hang out with me or something? Like that deterioration of your path is exactly the job of the female nature, in order to make sure that you are the man that you are. Because if she can knock you off your path, you're not good. If you hold your path and you're like, I got my day to do, right? So I'm gonna go do that. I'm on my path, right? And if there is support and leaning towards that, then you're probably gonna have a decent relationship. But if there's no support, there's no care, there's no belief in that, and just hang out and be friends, but don't have any expectations of it, because you have to be on your path. Or that's what's making you attractive. That's why you are who you are. And if you give that up, if you compromise that, then you're going to compromise everything else that's going on in your life. Don't compromise that. Stick to that no matter what. That's your path, man. Right? Some people will come and go, but you're your only person that you're going to be there the entire time, taking each step down that road. And if you decide that you're going to pull off that road because somebody else is going, hey, why don't you come over this way for a little bit? Then you're going to lose your way. Simon, do you cheat on your woman? Nope. Did Cantillon say anything about marriage and economics? Yeah, He absolutely does. He has an entire chapter about the increase and decreasing of the population of the people in a state. It's chapter part 1 and chapter 15, if I remember right. Hold on, I'll tell you. Oh, come on. This damn computer. I swear. There we go. Let's see here. Downloads, essay. It is, yeah, chapter 15, part 1, chapter 15. The increase and decrease of the number of people in a state chiefly depends on the taste and fashions and the ways of the life of the property owners. It very much goes into this. It talks about, even like, the behavior of women who, don't, like, you have to think, like, they didn't have the ability to go get an abortion back in the day. Like, if they got pregnant by the wrong dude, they were screwed. Like, their economic outcome was going to be terrible. So they were very conscious of who it is that they were going to end up getting with, because again, if they get with the wrong dude, I mean, like, they lost children constantly back in the day because of starvation. That was a horrible event to kind of go through, right? You think about it. Sorry, I guess I'm lazy. Thank you again for answering another question. Yeah. It's hard and it's serious relationship I've had in a while. Um, yeah. What's going on? All right, moving on. What do we got here? I think of Papillon on Debtor's Prison. That was a great movie. What are you guys talking about? All right. Women wait at the finish line for the winner. Here's, well, the thing is like, here's something that's pretty interesting, is that if you are picking a woman who's waiting at the finish line, you ever think about that? That's, I mean, you kind of get what you should expect what you get there, you know? All right. If you want a secure relationship and you don't want someone to cheat on you, then you need to learn how to identify the narcissist behavior you get involved with them. Well, Nathan, I think honestly, if you get into a relationship with the fear that they're going to cheat on you, then you have already entered into something that is doomed to begin with. If you are not willing to immediately step away from that relationship at any given moment, as much as it might hurt, like, you really like this person and you care all deeply about them, but they do something of such nature, like do something behind your back, do something devious, cheat, steal, anything like this nature. You're like, for me, like, to look at something like that, it was just like, I would never be able to understand how it is that I could trust myself with you ever again. Like, it's not your fault, it's mine. At that point, you screw it up, and then I'm allowing this to continue on. That's my fault. Yeah, right. Like, I don't know, like, you've already shown your behavior. I have to accept it or not. And if this is the way that you're going to conduct yourself and I'm allowing it, that is my fault. There ain't nobody else to blame for that. So if you're not immediately willing to walk away from it at any given moment, like at any, no matter what, then it's not, then you're doomed to begin with, to be honest. Yeah. And that's hard. That's hard to say it. It's hard to accept it, and it's hard to even believe it truly deep down inside. Like, that's the hardest part, to say, no, I am truly honest with myself when I say that I will walk away from this right now. All right. If this is not going to be hard, this is not going to be stressful, this is not going to be something that's knocking me off my path, this is not going to be the way it is. All right. And as much as I love it and have fun and enjoy and all that, if it's not gonna be, if I'm on a deviation, I'm sorry, it's gotta go. Everybody lies to each other. Yeah, they kind of do. Some women since 1997, married in 2005, supported each other through school and worked for family for them from the start, we were not perfect, but we were perfect for each other. Been with the same woman since then, yeah. How bad or how hard a narcissist try, they will in time show their true self to you. Need to date for at least a couple of years. I love my luxuries. Well, who doesn't, man? I mean, that's the thing. People get mad at me and they're all like, "Oh, dude, you buy that and you do this and that's luxurious and that's," and I'm like, "Of course it is." Right? Everything that you ever do to try and enjoy the experience of life is going to be a move into luxuries. Buying a nicer couch as opposed to having the old beat up one is a luxurious experience. And to think that people are not going to do that, of course they are. But you also have to understand that's the same thing that is going to separate the rich from the poor. Yeah. And again, this is a nice, beautiful, it's not necessarily luxurious truck, but it's a new truck, which is kind of a luxurious experience, and it's not even mine. So I like sitting in it when it belongs to somebody else and pretend that it's mine. It kind of feels the same. I don't know. I could buy one if I wanted. After you drive it around for a little bit, it's okay. It's the same thing. Yeah. All right. Get rid of things that ain't worth nothing. Everything will be a luxury. My ex is my best friend. Well, that's cool, Deja. It was a business decision. Well, that's cool, deja vu, because to think that you had somebody as close as, to have somebody very close in your life and then break up with them or, separate from them and then to not have them in your life ever again, right? Because that, it's, you think about it, it's just like, man, this is a difficult experience, this world. Right? Everything in life and all that goes with it. And there's very few people who are going to understand you to a level as somebody who's in like a close relationship. Um, I know plenty of people who split up and they're just like friends. Like I even know a guy who helps his ex-wife out in her business and stuff like that, and basically calls it like the family business, even though it's not really anything to do with him as much as just being part of it as far as helping out in times and stuff when they need it. That's really cool of him. And he doesn't, it's like, yeah, absolutely, why wouldn't you do that? That's kind of his attitude, is just like, why wouldn't you do something like that? And then other people who never speak to each other ever again. you know and then you think about that, it was just like, man, when you not speak to somebody ever again, that's it's pretty rough, right? All the conversations you ever had, all those deep, meaningful beliefs and ideas of the future and everything, just all just distant memories, right? Never to be had again, never to share the experience, never think about the goals out of accomplishments and how it is that you guys were planning to do things in the future together, and then find that your growth has finally succeeded in ways that you'd rather just love to share with that other person, and they're just not there. Yeah, it's you wonder, man, I thought we were kind of doing this together, weren't we? Like we were going to share in this fun together, this excitement together. Now it seems like I'm just doing it all on my own. Seems weird, right? But then again, why weren't you just doing it for yourself? What was it that was going on that had you so committed, so connected to this other person, that made you feel like, man, I've lost this connection in my life. I can't ever have it back, right? What is the meaning behind all that? You really have to say it. You have to say it to yourself. Right? I didn't want it to break up. I can't stand seeing them with other people. Once you admit it to yourself, once you finally get to the heart of it, and you can finally say it to yourself, man, I just still really love them, and I just can't take it. Right? Because that's what ends up happening with a lot of those people. The people was just like, no, I still really love them, but I just don't want to be with them anymore, right? And they have that mutual feeling together with that, and they really do like each other, and they always have and always will. But they just recognize that there's just not that kind of connection going on. That is absolutely beautiful, way, way awesome, right? I think to myself, wasn't it worth it saving my economy, but losing her is tough? Absolutely it is, right? I mean, losing anybody who is deeply connected to you, who shared those ideas, who shared the thoughts and dreams and hopes and all the other stuff, and that's not something that you get with very many people. In fact, it's really nothing that you're even supposed to share with other people, just the people who are closest to you. And when you don't have anybody to share that with, it kind of hurts, right? You know, it's like you feel out of place and lost in this world, and you just wish, man, I only had that person who was so connected back in the day. And yeah, that sucks, right? Losing that person is very difficult. But then again, like if you are asking that question, you should really ask the meaning behind that. Because if that person was so meaningful to you, what kind of importance were you putting on it? And is that the reason why maybe it didn't work out? It's because you had this major importance put on it. Once you let go of that, you might find that, things could have been different. And I'm not trying to like, go back into like saying, hey man, you could have had a better way or whatever with her. All I guess I'm getting at is that the difference in what you are feeling could be very different in the way that you are giving meaning to the information that is behind it all. All right. Like, I loved her. I did everything I could. I spent all this money on her. I tried to make the right environment and all this other stuff. Well, maybe it was all that effort that was the wrong move. And that really you should have been focused in on following your path. And if she had to go and let her go, and you say, I'm sorry, but you might have to just go, no matter how much I love you, you might find that she found that very attractive. And that's tough. That is so hard to internalize. It's so hard to think about it because you want it, like as a man, you want to do things to make it right. Right? You want to fix, you want to turn the screws, put the boards together, make it all like it's just like boom, there, right? I fixed it. It doesn't work. Doesn't, there's nothing that you can do. You have to be on your path, your goal, your outcome without deviation. When you do that, I swear to you, the attraction level will rise. And it's almost to the point you don't even care. In fact, that is the point. You don't care about that. That's not something you care about. You care about your goals, your ambitions, your path. That's what you care about. You don't care about this other thing. I mean, you might like it, you might give it some consideration, and if it doesn't interfere with what you got going on, it might be something you can include in your life. Once you got that kind of mindset, I assure you, things will change. That's what I'm afraid of. I'm not going to care about any other woman anymore, just myself. It's harder when you get older. But bro, that's the point. That's the point, man. Don't care. You got, like, if you care more about yourself and not like, hey, I'm like egotistical and I don't care about anybody else, but if you care more about your health, about your outcome, about your path, about your position in this world and where it is that you are headed, I assure you, right, you will have the best ability to take care of a woman who would really appreciate it. Right? That's the difference. I mean, if that's what you really like, I'll never have a woman in my life that cares and all this other stuff. If I don't put all this time and effort and energy into her, it won't work. You have to put it into yourself, and she's going to be attracted to that. And being able to take care of yourself in the best possible way, that's going to be attractive, and that's what's going to bring him in. All right? There's nothing you can do to make it happen. You can't go out there outside of yourself to get it. That's really where the scariest part is that you can't look outside yourself. It's inside, every bit of it. And that I know because guys want it to be an external thing. They want like, no man, if I fix this and that and the all this stuff and I put the pieces together, it'll work, right? Because I'm a mechanic or I'm a carpenter or that's how men operate, right? They go out there and they fix things. But understanding that it's a path on a journey and your own, like from your own internal soul creation, right? Like this is what's doing it. And the attraction of the things that come from the external world will start gravitating towards that center. What you are gravitating towards you is based on your understanding and the path that you are on. If you are deviating away from it so that you can try and attract these things that are out there, they're going to run. They will absolutely run away from you, guaranteed. If you don't believe in that energy, just take a moment and go and play with the dog. Go and play with the dog, run away from the dog, see what happens. Chase the dog, see what happens. All right? Just hang out with the dog and see what happens. The energy that you can get from playing with the dog is exactly the same energy that you will get from the entire world. Right? You chase anything, it will run. Right? But if you play the game and you start playing with it and you start running and you start chasing and you start doing all the other things that go along with it, but being in the energy of having fun and not whether or not you're trying to catch the dog or try to get the dog to catch you, but just being in the moment of just actually playing, you're going to have the absolute greatest time playing. Never once ever trying to accomplish anything. Right? Being in that energy is where the fun, where the excitement, where the new, where the possibilities, all those things start to come in. But the moment that you say, give me the ball, just drop the ball, right? You see how the energy starts to change? Give me the ball. God, dog never gives up the ball. Same thing. It's the same thing. All right. Attract more gold, money, and Bitcoin at this point for the kid. As maybe you could be a codependent if you lose someone in your life and you feel like you never find a soulmate again, then you're a codependent. Yeah, and that happens. Like, yeah, I mean, essentially that's it. You really have to ask yourself, and I mean, if you literally have to sit down in silence and said, man, if I walked away from this right now, how would that look? What would that be like? Can I do that right now? Am I no longer willing to accept dealing with this? Because you accept everything in your life, you know? Whether you're thinking, man, no, I just want to stick it out one more day and see if I can maybe one more conversation, one more time, one more no. See, like, you will never be able to say anything. There's nothing, literally nothing that you can say. It's all about your actions and everything that you do. And part of doing that is literally saying, I'm not going to do it anymore. I'm not going to step one more foot any further anymore. And as much as you wish and hope and dream that it will be the most beautiful life that you could ever imagine with this person, if it ain't happening, it's not happening. And you can't make it happen. The only thing that you can do is literally focus in on yourself. By focusing in on yourself and following your path, you will attract what it is that you really want in your life. I know it's hard because guys don't like that. Guys don't want to believe that. Okay? They want to be able to say, no, man, I want to be able to go and put these two parts together and then it'll be and then I'll have it, right? And it's not like that. It's not like that at all. It's much different from that. And when you recognize how you can see it by literally saying whether or not you're going to be able to walk away from this situation at any given moment, as much as you want the outcome to be a particular way, right? And when you do that, you know that you're a real man, right? I'm a real man who's going to, stand by my standards, my beliefs, and, as much as painful of an experience as it might be, I'm absolutely going to walk away from this thing. When you carry that sort of energy, you don't get hurt. You don't wonder about your soulmate. You don't think about things like that anymore. It's like that part of like this hoping that you have this external thing that come into your life, that isn't even something you even think about. It literally disappears from your understanding of life anymore. That person shows up, well, that's pretty cool. But if that person who shows up, who makes your life pretty cool, if they're no longer there, you have to accept that and be willing to participate in life without that, because you already were. Having that energy within it, I assure you can attract just about anything in the world. Right? So that's the thing. People are like, oh, relationships is money. And I was just like, relationships and money? And it was just like, is that what is important to everybody? is relationships and money. I mean, that's what they put at the highest level of where it is that they are going with their life, is to try and be in a relationship or try and acquire money. And I think to myself, man, if that's your only goal in life, man, it's going to be a really stressful situation. Very. I mean, all the relationships, it's an abundance of relationships out there, and money, it's there ain't nothing but abundance of money. And so to think that there isn't an abundance of either one of these things, it literally comes down to your understanding and the fact that you are in scarcity. You might have all the cable, you might have brand new trucks and all the other stuff, but you don't have these other things is because you literally feel the scarcity within you. This doesn't exist. It's too far out there. I can't do it. I don't know how. All these people are misbehaving or something of that nature. That's literally internal. That's a reflection of everything that you are thinking and feeling on the inside, and that's the reflection that you get from it. Because think about it, there's people out there who have an abundance of women, an abundance of money, an abundance of network, an abundance of failure, because everything is in constant state of abundance, always. Even lacking. There's an abundance of lacking. And you have to think about what it is that you are really facing when you think about those things. How come it's so far away? How come I can't reach it? Why is it not? Why is it that they get it and I don't? How come it's all these other things? Like, you keep asking yourself these questions. It's literally a scarcity mindset, and it's okay. It's not, I mean, it's not okay to be in a scarcity mindset, but it's okay to recognize that that's what's going on, because once you recognize it, then you can start dealing with it. But if you recognize it and then you turn to blame it, it was like all the women nowadays are just, and you say something like that, then you can expect that you're probably not going to be able to fix the problem. Right? Because you can't look out there and you say, well, there's some women out there who are getting in lasting, meaningful, deep relationships with men. Right? It's not like it's impossible. But if you believe that it's impossible, then it will be impossible. It will be presented as impossible. Every bit of evidence will show the impossibility. And that's for anything in life. I don't care what it is. It literally is everything in life. See, I know this because this is the life that I used to live. I try to share this regularly with people, is that when I was 40 years old, really drunk, deep in debt, had nothing going on, this is the life that I lived. I literally lived a scarcity mindset. I come up with reasons and excuses on why it is that there was nothing in my life and why it is that everybody else had something. Right? And I would blame and point the finger and then make up excuses on all that stuff. And then one day I realized, man, there are people out there who are doing quite well, even in today's economy, starting from scratch. So why can't I be one of those people? And there's no reason why you can't be. But if you have a mindset that says you can't be, then you're definitely not going to be. So maybe what is the first thing that you need to do? And I thought to myself, well, I look out there and I look at the people who are actually killing it in life, and I don't think they're alcoholics. Like, they could be, maybe, I don't know. But I don't think that they are. Like, I kind of know alcohol. I've lived that life quite a bit, know quite a few alcoholics in my life, and, spent great deal of my life as an alcoholic. And I look out at some of the rich people and some of the people who are really killing it in this world and stuff. I'm pretty sure that they're not alcoholics doing it, right? Maybe they are, but not very many. Right? So I knew that was probably the first step for me. That was my first step. I don't know what your first step is going to be, but that was my first step. And once you take the first right step, then you're going to look for the next right step. And this is really how it ends up going down the road. If you start changing that and you're like, oh, no, man, I got to this step, and then all these external forces keep me from actually succeeding, then you might as well be back at the first step again. That's your first, and then you're starting all over again. Because you have to make that next step and say, what are the challenges? What is it that I'm facing here? What is it that I need to do in order to overcome this next hurdle, this next, in order to get the next opportunity out there in this world? And if I make up excuses for it, then I will never be able to figure it out. Whoop, get back up, you guys. There you go. All right, 148 people. How long are we into this? An hour and 19. You guys having fun with this? Dude, there are some rich alcoholics, then you realize alcohol fuels a lot of workaholics. Oh, I'm talking, okay. I'm not talking about like I showed up to work every single day. I showed up for work every single day. I didn't miss a day. Not one. I didn't care how drunk I got the night before and how hungover I was. I showed up. Right? So I'm not saying that alcohol doesn't allow people to work hard. And I'm not saying that alcohol doesn't, exist within the realms of entrepreneurship and being, wealthy and all the other stuff that goes with it. I mean, there's plenty of alcohol within that society. What I'm trying to say is that I've never seen anybody become incredibly wealthy and doing the entrepreneurship, getting successful, doing all that other stuff, drinking the entire time, like being a drunk the entire time. I don't. I'm sorry. Maybe I'm just ignorant towards it. I don't know. Maybe, right? But I don't see that to be the case. Like they might be drinking, but they're drinking after business is done. You see what I'm getting at here? Um, Stupid people in here. What's going on? Um, who is this? Hold on one second here, guys. More sarcastic people in here, maybe some stupid. I don't have time for emotionally invested relationships. They are too much of a liability. I never missed I never missed for alcohol either. It was making me become meaner and lazier, not who I set out to be. So I quit. Well, that's coolly bang because most people don't figure it out. They don't see it. They just like in fact, the more you do it, the less you want to blame it on that alcohol and you want to blame it more on the externals that are out there. So it's good for you to recognize that it was making you lazier and meaner because it does do that. Abundance is a mindset we all need. Absolutely. And I try to encourage that as much as possible because that's really what it was that was a major difference for me. Like, you got to think, guys, like I don't really have anything going on as far as like, family inheritance or, like some family business or whatever. Like I'm just an average everyday dude, just like everybody else out there. And I was recognizing that I was failing miserably. Like it was not working. And I felt bad for my family. Like for me personally, it was just like, screw it. If I fail, whatever. But I have these little kids. And I'm thinking, dude, you're going to screw this up for them too? Like, honestly, man, are you going to do that? And I was like, man, I cannot look back on my life and think to myself, you are not going to, like, you didn't try to at least do something that was going to be the right way. Like, you're not going to even try to do that. And I thought to myself, man, how can I live with myself if I didn't even try? So it was like the motivation behind, like, it wasn't even necessarily for me anymore, right? But I did realize as I was going through this, it was like, man, if I can't take care of, like, it was somebody else who said it to me. It was like, dude, if you can't take care of yourself, how the hell are you going to take care of anybody else? Like, if you cannot take care of number one first, foremost, above everything else, if you cannot take care of yourself, how in the world are you ever going to be able to take care of anybody else? You're not. So don't even attempt to try and do that if you can't take care of yourself first. And that's when I realized that, man, I have got to give this stuff up. I have got to get out of that mindset of dumping my money into stupid things, into stupid pleasures, and start moving into excellence. And the moment that I started doing that, things started changing in the world. You know that? And it took a while. It's taken a long while to get there, but it's getting there. It's the path that you're on. It's the journey. Like Sarah and I were even talking. She says, "Should we go get a lottery ticket? Powerball's up to 1.5 billion." And I'm like, "Did you want to disrupt the path that we're on? I mean, this is a pretty good one. Like we were not doing well 10 years ago, and over the course of the last 10 years, we have really changed the way that we are living our life. Like we are really moving. getting, she's studying to get a degree. We're putting money away for retirement. We're living in my old neighborhood. My kids are going to the school that I went to. Like everything is going down the path that we wanted to. Why would we want to disrupt this with a lottery ticket to billions of dollars? Like, what would we do with that? Like, is that what we want to do? I thought we were enjoying this. She never went and got the ticket. Right? What would we do with that? How would that change our life? Will we give up on all the things that we're seeking to try and become better people? Will we give up on that, saying, "Oh, we don't need to do that anymore. We can just screw off now"? I mean, will we take that money and actually just do something really profound, really, really cool? Like, what could that possibly be? Go around to, maybe like low-income neighborhoods and make all new basketball courts in the cities or something? Like, I don't know. What would be fun? What would be really exciting to do with that money that would have a really good impact on the communities out there? See, that's my thoughts on winning the lottery. What could I do with that money that would be so profound, so much different? Because if it's like to give me a better way of life, like, what are you talking about? Everything's awesome. I pay my bills on time. I don't like, I don't know what the hell, like, a better way of life would be, I mean, this is an awesome way of life. So I don't know what that money would do, you know, except for maybe give me the ability to spread it out there and share and change the outcome for some people, and maybe, improve their experience just a little bit. But that's not the path that I want to be on. I want to be on this. I like this journey. I love doing the Uneducated Economist. I love the area that I'm in. I mean, like, I don't want to give this up. Uh, Sounds like you don't know what it's like to support people who don't do anything to elevate themselves. When my ex-wife buys a lottery ticket, I get excited for her even though I know she won't win. All right, 1 million free membership gifts to viewers after you win the lotto. Yeah, there's that. I mean, yeah, I guess I could gift everybody memberships to the Uneducated Economist. All right. All right. When a woman tells you of luxuries, does that push the man to make more for luxuries, worsening the economy? I'm not sure. Male or female, only disciplined people pursue excellence. Oh, that's for sure. Build a community, recreation, swimming pool, and the company to run it. Yeah, and that's kind of what it was like, because I thought about, like, what would you do for a community? Like, oh, we'll build them this really awesome park, but then you got to maintain the park. You got to do all the other stuff that goes with it. But if you could do something like improve something that is already existing, like I said, like, go around and redo all the basketball courts, and how expensive would that be? But there's something of that kind of nature, it doesn't have to be a basketball court. It could be anything. But you rebuild these things to make it better, right? Make it new, make it, improve it, and so that they can enjoy this, upgrade essentially to their community. And to me, like, that's the kind of thing, like, if I had all that money, I wouldn't want to go and make it. I wouldn't want like right now. I like being in the idea of how it is that I can try and be in the flow and making the money and putting it away and stuff like that. Like, I really enjoy doing a lot of that kind of stuff. And don't get me wrong, like, having a ton of money so I wouldn't have to stress about ever having to pay a bill again in the future. That would be pretty cool too. But, like, you know, if I had all that money, I wouldn't be pursuing economics. I wouldn't be pursuing anything. Why would you? I mean, maybe I would, I guess. I'm really into it. I like studying it. But there was a reason that I got into it in the beginning, and it was because essentially I was failing and I wanted to know what was going on. All right. So it was that kind of curiosity that led me to where I am today. And I don't think that would exist if you had won the lotto. You could give the lottery to charity, then what would be the point of playing? Like, I mean, I guess it would be cool to give it to charity, but, like, what would be the point of playing? It was like, I mean, I do things charitable now if I wanted. Like, I don't have to win the lottery to do that. Buy nuclear energy index if you want to gamble. Women wanting things is not new. We also know any stimulus helps the economy. It is good. That's up to the individual to decide. Somebody that does not help themselves is not supporting. That's enabling, assuming that they can help themselves. All right. Not you, Simon, some guy in here. All right, on her. Hernomenas. I don't know how to say your name, man. I'm sorry. All right, let's cruise back down here to the bottom. Can anybody truly be independent of everybody else? No, not really. Like, I mean, unless you're like living out in the woods, like a mountain man or something like that, then most likely you're gonna have to depend on the grid of some sort, right? You know, somebody's got to put the gas, somebody's got to like deliver the gas to the gas station, somebody's got to, butcher the hogs, somebody's got to do all the stuff in order for you to have everything that you have in your life. You're literally depending on everybody else. Now, if you did live as some mountain man out in the middle of the woods somewhere, you're still even almost at that point kind of relying on, the other people of the world out there building tools and, giving you the ability to have what it is that you need to live out there in the woods. Like it doesn't like, you know, unless you're like some living like a Native American, like a Native Americans did or something like that, where you're just completely like 100% off the land. Most likely you're going to have to depend on somebody out there for something, right? And then even then, you think about it, like the Native Americans, I don't know if they can necessarily would have been able to live independently themselves. Like they had to have their tribe, right? Like it was the community themselves that were able to survive, not the individual. And so even on that, they were relying on so yeah, you have to rely on other people ultimately. Uh, God designed us not to be alone. Yeah, I agree. Natives did a lot of the trading. I look at what I'm spending now. Before, when I was with my girl, I lived so cheaply, it's crazy. Then calling me approved automatically. Huh. The Fed needs rehab. We got an hour and a half into this. I was really just kind of trying to talk about the Federal Reserve and how it is that their monetary policy was essentially they were imprisoned and then they essentially escaped prison and then imprisoned everybody else, and it wasn't like they didn't plan it. Like they knew that they were going to do it. And that's what I find very interesting about a lot of the individuals out there who want to blame the Fed and call the Fed out for creating an inflationary scenario. And I'm like, that's exactly what they needed you to believe. And that's where I find it really difficult for a lot of individuals out there who are talking about economics to deliver an appropriate message to the working class. I just really do. Like, I'm not saying that their information is not accurate. Like they have a lot of data, they have a lot of talking points that they bring up, and a lot of good theories that are based behind it. But without the understanding that of the credible threat theory, where the Federal Reserve was attempting to push elevated inflation to regain their monetary policy, without incorporating that into the strategy, without incorporating that into the understanding of economics, you're really missing out on a lot. Because this isn't me like, kind of just, oh, maybe it's something like this. I mean, this is literally their own words being delivered that are essentially not heard, except for the other central bankers who are communicating these things. So that's where I try to share with this audience here, how it is that we can look at things from a working class point of view that is going to be different from what you are going to find out there on just about any other, channel or station or article that you read, is that most of them will never really express what it is that has happened here with the Federal Reserve and how that inflation expectation saved their policy, like literally got them out of prison. They were imprisoned by the lower bound of zero. And then when they got out of prison, they put you into prison. And that was, they had no other choice. What else were they going to do? They were going to fail. Right? And they knew it, and they said it, and they knew it was going to be painful, and they said that too. You know, uh, I have never bought one lottery ticket in my life. Well, good for you. I raised my boys off reserve for many reasons. Buying land was the best thing. I guess you're native, like off of the reserves. So it comes down to bail, bondsman, parole, or probation for the Fed, literally. I'm out of prison just like the Fed now, thanks. The CPI is 2.7 because 70% of the report is missing. But hey, well, I mean, that's actually, it doesn't really matter what that number is because FASB 56 is going to give you whatever number they want to tell you anyway, right? So we don't really have to think about enough with the stupid. Right. If that's what we're gonna hear and just gonna be commenting and stuff like that, I'm just gonna block you out of here. Okay. Like let's keep the conversation at least something encouraging to the topic. It's just like to sit here and just call each other out for something like that. It's just not gonna be useful or helpful. Adios. All right. And so anyway, I even forgot where I was going with that. Oh, with the FASB 56, right? So FASB 56 is going to basically it's legalized. They can tell you whatever they want in order to protect the national security or whatever. So there's already no real reason to trust these numbers that they are giving out there. But to understand that to look at those numbers is to look at what it is that the Federal Reserve is looking at in order to conduct monetary policy. So regardless of whether or not they are accurate or not, it doesn't really make any difference when you're thinking about how it is that the Federal Reserve is using those numbers to conduct their monetary policy. Like we could wish and hope and dream them to do it differently, but it doesn't matter. Like I don't think the number's accurate anyway, and whether or not the Fed is up or down or sideways doesn't make any difference to me. It's about how it is that I understand that information in order to position myself accordingly, because I can't force them to do it the right way. I can't force them to say, hey, look at these numbers, do those things, and all that other stuff. I can't force them to be like that. And if that's the kind of like strategy that I was to try and take, well, then it would be very frustrating because I would be looking at things that they should be doing as opposed to what it is that they are doing and why it is that they are doing it. When I look at it in that fashion, then it gives me the ability to then use that information to position myself much differently, right? Like I could say, oh man, they got it so wrong in every way. They have no idea what they're doing. And then I would miss the entire credible threat theory. Like you wouldn't be able to internalize anything of all the information that I have delivered because it would be pointless. You have already committed yourself to them not knowing anything about what they are doing. So the idea of trying to understand what it is that they are doing would be pointless. It wouldn't work for you. And that's unfortunate because that's the way like I think a lot of people operate. Even the idea end the Fed. Okay? Like I have hoodies and shirts and t-shirts and hats, all kinds of stuff to say end the Fed on. Okay? And I do honestly think that a hard money system would be a much better system for me to operate in. Like I would do very well, and I would appreciate that more than this one. But I can wish and hope and dream and pray all day long. It ain't gonna make any difference. And so regardless of what I want, it doesn't matter. Right? What it does matter is what is taking place, and that is this fiat currency system that uses fake numbers, in order to push out there a particular belief system upon the people in order to get their monetary policy into a position in which that they find appropriate for the economy. And all that is not like something that is right. It's not right or wrong. It just is. And that's the point about it. It's like it's not right or wrong. It just is. It just is what it is. And as we try to say, oh no, it is right or it is wrong, you're literally going to block your ability to see what it is that is happening because you're going to have this belief system that says it should be different or it is right because of these reasons or whatever. Instead, just eliminate all that stuff out of it and just say, hey, the Fed is operating at this level because of these reasons. Thinking about it, they wanted that neutral interest. The neutral interest rate was a problem at the lower bound of zero. Just think about that problem, that single problem. The Federal Reserve was in a position in which the neutral interest rate was very close to zero. That is not a problem anymore. Why? Why is it not a problem for them anymore? Because of elevated inflation and inflation expectations. So this thing solved their problem. Now, think about all the people out there, all the end the Fed people who were pushing the idea the Fed is causing inflation, hyperinflation, end the Fed now. All that information that was being pushed out there by all those people was literally giving the power to the Federal Reserve to create the inflationary scenario that they were looking for. It's as if they were a team player. They don't know it, though. I don't think they know it because very few people ever talk about this stuff. Right? In fact, nobody does. I'm the only one. And I mean, I get very few people who pay attention to any of this stuff because they would much rather hear how it is that the Federal Reserve is creating inflation and going to destroy your life. And as they deliver that information, the Federal Reserve is sitting back going, God, man, this is easier than I thought. All these people that's doing it, nobody's listening to UE, thank God. And if they're listening to them, man, this whole thing wouldn't work. Knowing the economy is being free to do something about it, that's all I need right now. Conservative feedback. Maybe they will start adopting. The government, Fed don't want to raise Social Security COLA, so always low numbers. Never seen it, just left blank though. Good call, Simon. Psychology is a two-way street with people's perception and perception management. Absolutely. Basically, the guys who have the most influence on the economy are pushing for inflation. Odds are it's going to happen. Yes, but COVID-19, they didn't have that problem anymore. We should be discussing some of their new stuff. Yeah, but, well, the thing is that by saying they don't have the problem anymore, you're not discussing how it is that the problem is solved. What you're saying is like, let's think of another problem that they have. Right? I mean, that's essentially what you're saying, Deplorable. It's just like, no, that was their past problem. What are their new problems? What is the new problem that they have? And I'm like, no, the past problem that they have is the solution that is now your problem. So your problem is their solution. Think about that. If we were going to discuss the next problem, our problem is this elevated inflation that we have to constantly deal with in order to, have our daily lives be enough to carry us through the month. That's a very difficult thing to operate in with elevated inflation. Our problem that we need to solve these days is their solution that they don't want solved. All right, Simon, another great video. Thank you. Yeah, you bet, man. The numbers are always most wrong at the end of the year. Why? Because year-end numbers affects COLA. What's COLA? So basically, they figure out how much you're going to get in Social Security based on the inflation that has taken place out there. And the idea that, the Social Security payments are going to be buying anything into the future is like, to me, I don't care what they are saying with the numbers or how much they're going to increase it. It doesn't matter. The Social Security benefits will not be buying anything into the future. And that is the important part about it. It doesn't matter what they change it or how much they increase it or anything else like that. The idea that they are going to provide you with a payment that is going to match an increase in inflation going into the future is very unlikely. Very unlikely. See, the problem won't be the payments. The payments are going to come through. That part is not a problem. You will definitely get your Social Security payment. The benefits are going to show up. Very little doubt of that. The problem that we will face is that those benefits will not buy any goods and services because we don't produce real goods and services here in the United States to compensate for those benefits. It doesn't work like that. Right? Our nation is quickly and very much going to go onto a path in which that the real goods and services have to be purchased from outside of this nation. And the Social Security benefits won't be enough. There, you can't trade. You can come up with all the creative financing in the world to push the payments out. That won't be a problem. But the payment itself won't be able to go buy anything, and that will be a problem. They had the problem with the interest rates being so low. Now they're around 6.25. What interest rate are you talking about? And they don't have that problem anymore. Well, I don't know what interest rate you're talking about. The Fed funds rate is like, it's like at what, 3.75. I don't know. What did they just move it to? I don't even know anymore. It's just like I quit paying attention to it. I'm just waiting for it to be at neutral. No, even like the idea now of where the Fed funds rate is, if they're under 5% on the Fed funds, like they don't have the room to stimulate the economy. Like even now, interest rate adjustments would never, ever, 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 ever stimulate the economy. You can't do it with the lowering of interest rates at this point. And that is like heartbreaking for a lot of people to hear. Right? They want to believe that the lowering of interest rates can stimulate the economy. They really honestly believe that, but that's not the case. It's not going to work. It's not going to work ever, right? Because there's not enough room for the Federal Reserve to actually lower interest rates before running back into the lower bound of zero again. So dropping of interest rates to stimulate the economy would typically take around a 5% move. Here's the problem that we face is that during the interest rate adjustments to stimulate the economy, it's because inflation has fallen very low. And in fact, it may even be a deflationary scenario that is kicking in that is forcing the Federal Reserve to try and stimulate the economy by dumping the interest rates, getting corporations to hire people, and the hiring people going back to work stimulates the economy. That attempt will fail because when the inflation is gone, R star is just slightly above zero, meaning that the Fed funds rate would be at zero and still be at neutral. I don't know how many people get that. Without the inflation, the Fed funds rate can fall back to zero and be at neutral or very close to it, just slightly under it. Unless they can take that interest rate into negative territory by a significant amount, then there is no stimulating the economy with an interest rate adjustment. It's just not possible anymore. I don't know how many people try to communicate that out there to the people, but it's not possible anymore. There is no stimulating effect coming from an interest rate adjustment, period. End of story. Unless you go into negative territory. You go into negative territory, then you can probably do it. But there's no negative interest rate. Not here, not now, not with the cash in the system. None of that stuff is going to be happening. You can take interest rates back to zero and then do massive quantitative easing, stimulus packages through fiscal policies and stuff like that. But it won't be coming from interest rate adjustments. Like that interest rate adjustment, bringing that back down to zero, will not spark the economic activity to stimulate the economy. Will not happen ever again. Now, I shouldn't say that. If you have persistent inflation long enough going into the future, and I mean persistently high inflation, and you pull that R star enough, then maybe, just maybe, given enough time and enough pain and, going into the future, then you might be able to get the Federal Reserve back into a position in which that lowering interest rates would stimulate the economy. But at this point, that doesn't exist. And nobody really knows that. But you know it. I mean, I'm telling you, whether you want to believe it or not, I don't know. That's up to you. But I mean, I'm telling you now so you'll know it. And we will witness that taking place as they go to try and lower interest rates in the future and find that it doesn't work. And there'll be a whole lot of fiscal policy that steps in, meaning government spending, whether it's through check distribution or just spending on infrastructure projects or something like that nature. You, the person, the individual, will no longer be stimulating the economy with the borrowing of money and going back to work. That part doesn't function in the economy like it used to. And that's scary as hell. That is, like, for those who understood what I just said, that is probably the scariest part about this. Is that the idea that you're participating within the strategy, it's no longer there. Because the Fed did at one time try to lower rates to get you to go work. If you went to work, then you would create economic activity that would eventually show up in the inflationary pressures. That's what they would look for by the lowering of interest rates. But it doesn't work like that anymore. They've had interest rates at the lower bound of zero for almost 10 years, had unemployment hit historically low levels at the end of the Obama administration, stay historically low throughout the Trump administration, and failed to produce an inflationary scenario. Uh-oh. Right? Uh-oh. But again, if you don't see it that way and you don't recognize it like that, then it'll just be invisible to you, I guess. All right. Big T, I'm not sure why you're here, bro. All right. All right. Do we have to go into hyperinflation before the interest rates could affect the economy? Well, I mean, the idea of a hyperinflation scenario is not even a real thing, right? Not right now, not the way that, the demand for the dollar exists outside of the United States with the dollar denominated debt to the levels that it is. Hyperinflation isn't a real thing. Not yet. Now, if you were to eliminate all the dollar denominated debt that exists outside of the United States and the people who were writing dollar denominated debt quit writing dollar denominated debt and then wrote off all their dollar denominated debt and decided that, all dollar transactions were no longer going to, be valid, everybody would starve. They would suffer in pain and misery. War would break out in just about every location. And then maybe, as those dollars came home to roost, we would see a hyperinflationary scenario then. But even on that, it's such an unlikely thing that it's like, I don't see anything even remotely coming close to that. Quite the opposite. In fact, I see the Federal Reserve stuck in a position in which that they are going to have to figure out how to print up dollars at a pace that is fast enough to meet the demand for dollar-denominated debt that exists outside of the United States. And this is a problem that they were facing 20 plus years ago. We know this. I mean, just go back and look at Ben Bernanke's speech talking about it. I love how people tell me that I don't know nothing, and then I bring up all this stuff that they never heard of before, and they're like, well, obviously you don't know. And then here it is. They tell you straight up, right? Where is it? Where is it? Am I on the right one yet? Okay. The Fed can inject money into the economy in still other ways. For example, see, the Fed can inject money into the economy in still other ways. This speech, Ben Bernanke, right? Deflation, how to prevent it from occurring here, making sure it doesn't happen in the United States. It literally talks about when interest rates get to the lower bound, how they have run out of ammo. Like, that's literally a quote right out of here, run out of ammunition. And then says that's okay. They can deploy the gold machine, right? Use their words in order to create an economic or a monetary policy, and then use asset purchases, large-scale asset purchases, the quantitative easing, right? So they talked about using their words. They talked about the quantitative easing. And then he says, and if all that fails, now you think about it, at this point, it hasn't failed yet. All their talking and quantitative easing has worked so far. I mean, if people don't believe it, we're going to work here Monday morning, right? Okay. So it's still working, right? It's still operation. And yet there is still other ways of injecting even more money into the system. They're not worried about hyperinflation. They're not worried about inflation being too high. They're worried about it being too low and how to get more money injected into the system. They figured out there is other ways, right? The Fed can inject money into the economy in still other ways. For example, the Fed has the authority to buy foreign government debt as well as domestic debt. Right? So they can buy the domestic government debt, all the treasury bonds, and then they can go out there into the world and buy up the debt of the world as well. They already have the authority to do it. How many people know that? None. Nobody talks about it. Literally nobody. I've never seen any single person ever talk about that. Ever. But me, the uneducated economist, right, who doesn't know nothing, is sitting around waiting for the quantitative easing to run its course where the treasury purchases is no longer going to work anymore. They're going to switch over to buying the foreign treasury debt or foreign government debt. And then people are going to lose their mind thinking that this is all new concept, even though it was talked about literally 20 years ago. You see the difference inside of this, how we look at it so much differently than everybody else? How many other people see it this way? Nobody. Literally nobody sees it this way. That's why they can't understand what's going on with the Fed. All right, Justin, $2. Thank you so much. You are, or did you author a book? I haven't. I have written chapters. I've probably written and compiled enough to write 3 books, right? But putting it together into something that I find good, worthy. Like, I don't want to just put out some crap. Like, some people are like, dude, I use AI to write a book. And I'm like, no, absolutely not. Right? Absolutely not. What I put together, I want to be an absolute useful guide for the average, everyday, blue-collar worker to open up, read, and then have a profound understanding of what it is that's going on within the economy so that they can make good and accurate decisions for themselves based on the underlying economic forces that will then be recognizable going into the future. I want that book to be that important, right? Then write 3 books. We are already in stagflation, and they think we need more money in circulation. So I guess, well, the thing, okay, so here's the thing. This whole $40 billion money injection that they're calling, like, everybody's saying they're firing back up in the quantitative easing. Okay. Let's just think about this for just a minute. They're doing $40 billion inside of how many trillions of dollars are sitting on the balance sheet? I forget now. I don't even know. Like, what, 7, 8, 6 trillion, 7 trillion? Like, how many trillions of dollars are sitting on the balance sheet? And we're talking $40 billion. Okay. So we're not if we were like 20 years ago, that would have been like, oh my God, like, what in the world? $40 billion today on the big bank's balance sheet, especially considering that it's being purchased in short-term debt, 1 month to a year. Now, if they were to do this $40 billion purchase in 1 month treasuries, in 30 days, it would all be unwound and as if it never happened. Does anybody talk about it like that? Like, even if they were from a year, like if they were to do these purchases today and end it today, in 1 year, it would all be over. If they bought 100% 1 year treasuries, but they're buying 1 month to 1 year. So these things are unwinding fairly quickly. And that anything that they do is going to be unwound within a year. Is it a lot? Yeah. Is it concerning? Kind of. But when you think about what's going on within the banking regulation system right now, in order to stifle the inflation, to try and bring the inflation down, the banking regulation constraints is making the liquidity issues more prevalent. That's how they're trying to deal with the inflationary scenario. At the same time, they're lowering the Fed funds rate to try and support the labor market. You see how they got 2 different monetary policies being conducted at once? Right? Here they got one, hey, we're mandated to deal with labor and we're mandated to deal with inflation, and they're moving in opposite directions. What do we do? Right? So the Federal Reserve has banking regulation constraints and liquidity issues that they're trying to deal with to try and fight the inflationary scenarios. At the same time, putting the perception out there to the people that they're lowering interest rates to support the labor market. This is two different monetary policies being conducted at the exact same time. Does anybody recognize it as two? I mean, banking regulations and the constraints within the banking system and the big banks' balance sheets is not the same as trying to support the labor market with the lowering of the Fed funds rate and putting the idea out there that they're supporting the labor market with the lowering of Fed funds rate. These are two different things that are happening at the same time. Like they literally have a dual mandate to deal with labor and have to deal with inflation. And people think that the interest rate adjustment is their only tool. That is so wrong. In fact, that tool doesn't even really work. The communication about it does when it comes to the labor market and trying to support the broader economy when they communicate that they're lowering the Fed funds rate. While at the same time, doing banking constraints and the not shadow banking, like that's not it. Doing how do I put this? Shadow restriction. So here they lower the Fed funds rate, but yet they essentially make it more restrictive inside of the big banking system. Quite the opposite move. You see how they're doing this? Like nobody recognizes it like that. You know, people are asking all the time, how come the SOFR has moved up above the Fed funds rate? That shouldn't happen like that. And then you look at how it is that the big banks are constrained on their balance sheet, especially when it comes to like some of the liquidity, capital requirements that they have and stuff. They just literally demand a higher return in order to give up that capital. Two opposite strategies, pretty much, right? Yes, we need a careful deleveraging. They're doing the opposite things which don't affect the outcome. Only inflation matters, higher for longer. Where's the hedge? I don't know how we got here, but I'm finding it quite hilarious that a penny is worth 3 cents and a nickel is worth 7 cents. It's like we're in Alice in Wonderland or something. Well, deplorable. I mean, anybody who has been watching my channel, like, I did a video, I don't know, maybe the first 6 months of starting this channel, telling people to save their pennies, telling people to save your copper pennies, your pre-81 pennies. If you have no other way of saving anything, save those pennies. I've been saying it for years and years and years now. And then here it comes, right? And it was just like, so for me, it wasn't like that hard to see it. Copper pennies have been worth more than a penny for a long time. So simple enough just to, I work retail, so every time the till pops open, I can recognize the copper as opposed to the zinc, and I've been pulling the copper pennies out for years. you know? All right. All right. The thing to fix it they won't do, raise people's wages so they can afford to buy things. That's absolutely incorrect, Allspeed. You can't do that. That's not going to work. We're already not competitive against the globe out there when it comes to manufacturing. If you are not manufacturing real goods and services to send out there to the world isn't sending you their money. There's no way that you can raise your wages and then be competitive against the rest of the world out there. It isn't going to happen like that. In fact, what is going to end up happening is that they're going to force feed money into the people, so it doesn't matter if they raise your wages or not, and then you're going to spend that money in some sort of attempt to try and produce a consumer. Because your wages aren't going to be enough. Like, you can go to work all day long. You can get higher wages. You're not going to earn enough in order to be a consumer again. That was a time long ago when you produced goods and services that you could sell out there to the rest of the globe, and the globe sent you their money. You could raise your standard of living with that. Nowadays, you're not going to be able to do it the same way. It just doesn't work because we're a fiat-based currency. We produce debt, send the debt out there to the world send us their real goods and services that they are producing, their real goods, and then we attempt to sell those things to each other for some sort of economy. Right. Producing saving nations are strong nations. Debtor consumer nations are really weak. They don't appear to be that way, but just take anybody out there who's heavily in debt. They drive nice trucks, wear nice clothes, have an appearance of being really awesome, but ultimately they're very fragile. All right. Simon's going to say it's just enough to get the wheels greasing. It won't cause any inflation. Yeah, there's I mean, the only inflation that I see actually occurs comes from supply chain breakdowns. I don't know where everybody else is seeing it, but I see it in a supply chain breakdown. It doesn't happen with the money printer. If it did, lumber would be expensive, but lumber's cheap. Lumber's cheaper now than it was in 2018. Right? So, I mean, we could say, dollar devaluation, except for lumber and eggs, And then if it happens to be in eggs, then we can call it out for that. But then when it's not in eggs, then we don't call it for that. I mean, it's like, how many people actually really understand what's happening with inflation when they say that? Money printer go burr, lumber prices go up. Money printer go burr, egg prices go up. And then they go back down to their normal price. And then they go like, well, where did all the inflation go? How come it went away? Like they can't even answer the question. But as soon as it goes up, oh man, that's the Fed right there. What else do you need to know? And it'll be like, do you think maybe it's a supply issue? Maybe, just maybe, supply and demand that's doing it. No, you don't want to. You just want to blame the Fed. Okay, well, whatever. It's the Fed. If Big T is complaining about being kicked out while he's sitting here, bro, you're just like, obviously you've moved into the realm of just being troll, right? And like, this is the reason why you are going to get kicked out, is because you are literally not adding to the conversation, man. Be part of it, man. Be part of this group. All right, eggs inflation, not a big deal. Car insurance, that's a problem. Health insurance, that's the problem. Well, yeah, if you were insuring 97 Suburbans, do you think insurance would be as expensive as it is today? Right? Probably not. If everybody out there on the road was driving 97 Suburbans or vehicles that were worth as much as that 97 Suburban, do you think insurance? No. Average cars nowadays are so stupid expensive that not even a regular person can buy them anymore. You'd have to buy, you'd completely just ruin your life by buying a brand new car, going into that deep of debt because they're so expensive, and then the insurance on it is just astronomical because of how expensive they really are. I mean, if everybody was driving $10,000 cars, the insurance would be cheap as hell. But we don't have cheap cars, so you can blame inflation, or you can blame the fact that cars are not built cheap. They're incredibly expensive. There was a time when you could buy a brand new car and actually work on the thing. Nowadays, you can't even, you open up the hood, you can't even see where the engine is, So it's like, if it even has an engine, it probably has battery in it or something like that, then there's no way of working on it. That's the point. That's why it's so. Same thing with houses. People are like, man, a house back in the 50s was, like $5,000 or something. It was a plywood box. It was hardly a house. It was a shed, right? It was a shed that, that had electricity and water in it. That was the difference inside of it. Nowadays, houses are so much more than that. They can't even be considered the same thing anymore. So yeah, they're going to be a hell of a lot more expensive. And a lot of people say, oh man, they're built way cheaper nowadays. They're not, right? There might be people who have constructed it more assembled it improperly. That part can take place. But the way that they build houses now are so very, very intense, right? Lots of parts, lots of pieces, lots of engineering, and a lot goes into it. Before, you could just mark out some rocks and lay some beams and put some flooring down and get the walls and the roof on it and call it good, right? It doesn't go like that anymore. And so, yeah, these things are going to be super expensive because they're not built like they used to be. You know? My plywood shed built in the 50s is still killing me in rent. Yeah. Well, yeah, the rent still goes up, but like it's still a place, right? Still in competition with all the other ones. With the baby boomer passing away, we will have not so much a need for all these homes, but the powers that be will keep the prices high to keep the money. Yeah, deplorable. I don't agree with that. They don't keep the prices high. People are willing to pay that price. That's what it comes down to. If people weren't willing to sign their name to the bottom line, then they wouldn't be buying the house. The house prices wouldn't be that high, but they're willing to put their name at the bottom line. You know, like people aren't making it be that way; they're choosing it to be that way. All right, that's it. Simon, can you talk through supply and demand impact of baby boomers age out? Thank you. Well, that's the thing. Like, I'm already fine. Like, people were saying, "Oh man, when the baby boomers pass away, there's going to be this, all this, all this space or something, or all this lacking." I don't know. I mean, the baby boomer population is definitely one that is going to have a very profound impact throughout everything from the time that they were born, going through schools, going through their careers, going through, and final through death and all that. They have definitely changed the way that the course of the economy ends up looking because of the sheer amount of them. Right? So there's a lot that's going on. What I find very difficult to try and rationalize with other people's ideas that when the baby boomers are gone, right? Because the way that a lot of people look at it is that these baby boomers are living essentially in a house by themselves. Right. And that's kind of like I think a lot of the people's ideas behind it. Because that's essentially what had happened to them. Like they moved out of their parents' house, they bought a house, they grew up, they had kids, those kids moved out, and now they're living on their own. Right. And that's kind of like how people are believing this going down. But I'm finding it to be very different in the idea that a lot of multi-generational families are now living together, which is not necessarily the case 30, 40 years ago. Maybe before that, there was a lot of multi-generation, but there was a time in there like that dissipated. Like the people were no longer living multi-generational in the same place. So as that faded away, I believe that is now coming back into existence again. So when the baby boomers pass away, it's not like they're going to leave an available place. There's probably already somebody who is occupying that dwelling. Now, whether they stay there or move into another one, that might be a different story. But ultimately, not all the old people are living by themselves. They have other people, grandchildren or their own children or somebody living with them. So when they do pass away, even though that dwelling might come up for rent or sale or something, the person who's living in it with them is going to have to find another place to be, which again doesn't necessarily add to the supply. That's a difference in the way like people used to live to the way they are living nowadays. Right? If we were living back in the day where everybody was very independent, each lived in their own place separately, then it would be like a different story. But that's not necessarily the case. It's too difficult to try and make it on your own. So multi-generations are starting to become more of a norm. And then again, like how much consumption do old people really do? Not very much. It's mostly on the young. Right? The young people are the ones who do most of the consumption. So again, if they die off, they didn't really take away from the consumption and they may not add any supply or very little supply, or the supply that comes on is quickly absorbed, or taken. All right. Simon's correct. I have some videos that I downloaded from YouTube of neighborhoods from the 40s and 50s, and the homes do actually look like sheds. Yeah, well, I live in a very old area. Right? I mean, Astoria is, it was founded back in the 1900s. This is a very old area. And so you can find houses that were built 100 years ago. And if you find a house that was built 100 years ago, it's a solid home. It really is. There ain't much to them. Right? There's basically 4 walls and a couple of partition walls and 1 bathroom, nothing about it, right? So they are not built the same way. Like a new house today doesn't even look anything like the old ones that are built around here. Uh, that's true about difference of newer homes and the into the older homes. Astoria sounds quaint. It is. 1,000 balls on Plinko? Wait, my house was built in 1900s. It's beautiful. Yeah, I lived in a really old house too, and it was in a pretty cool location, sat way up on this hill, looked down over a field, and but oh my gosh. And I put a roof on it. That was about the biggest improvement to it. And that roof is still, it's still holding up really good today. That was shit, 18 years ago, 15 years ago. It's quite a while. Yeah. A lot of people also burned wood, had cheap oil furnaces. There's lots of factors. Yeah, in fact, that's, the house that I had lived in, it had an oil furnace, which was very difficult to heat the house with and efficiently. I mean, it would heat the house just fine, but man, it cost a lot of money. And then wood burning. I mean, when I grew up in a house that's the only heat that it had was a big earth stove. And oh man, heating a house with wood is really nice. When you get that good warmth heat coming off of that wood fire, God, there's really nothing like it. But what a pain. What a pain. You had to constantly be cutting wood, constantly bringing it into the house. Always dirty. Everything was nasty. Bugs are always on it because you store it outside in the woodshed. It was just like dealing with firewood was a pain. It was very difficult. And it was years. Like I grew up in that house and then I lived in that house for a long time afterwards too. And it was just like the day that I moved into this house with the heat pump. I was like, man, that is so rad. I'd never have to touch anything ever again. It's always the same temperature, whether it's, 40 degrees or 90 degrees, it's the same temperature in the house all the time. And it's just like, holy moly, man, that is like, yeah, I ain't never gonna give that up again. I could never go back. Uh, a lot of work. You touch the wood 6 or 7 times from cutting it, chopping it, stacking it, etc. Yeah, it's an insane. Like you got to go all the way. It's expensive too when you think about it. You got to drive all the way up into the woods, the gas money to drive up there, the gas money while operating the saw, the time it takes to actually cut the wood, load. Like usually it's not next to the truck, so you got to pack it like out of the woods to the truck, or roll these big pieces to the truck and then split it once it gets there. So then you got it out of the woods to the truck, into the truck, right? And then back to the house. You throw it out of the truck and then you take it again and you stack it up into the shed, wherever that happens to be. And then you got to take it out of the shed to the house. And then, usually you got another place where you store it. And then as the fire needs to be fed, you pull it out of that storage from the house into the fire. Man, it's just constant. It's just, you will spend so much time just trying to stay warm. It is even beyond the expense. It's just the time that is taken. Like I go over and I push a button on the wall and then go back to what I'm doing. Back then, it would be sometimes, every single day, half an hour at least, just to stock the house up, make sure there was plenty of wood, and getting everything the next day, every single day. There was time that was taken just to stay warm before you even got the ability to be warm. You had to put the time in just to get close to it, and then you had to work to stay warm. uh, does UE sell pellet stoves? Yes, I do sell. Well, I have sold pellet stoves in the past. It's not generally like the product that usually a heating supply center will sell pellet stoves, but I sell a lot of wood fuel pellets. Like I can't even tell you guys. I don't even know. I mean, I should ask the boss to figure out how many we go through. I think there's somewhere around 35 to 40 pallets come on a truck, if I remember right, 30 to 40. And there will be times in the winter we'll bring in 2 trucks a week. That's how many people will come in. We store the pellets at our place, so you can buy a ton and then pick them up a bag at a time. So a lot of people will do that program where they'll come in and pick up 5, 6, 7, 10 bags at a time. And so we'll have a constant, like in the wintertime when it gets cold, it's just a constant stream of people who are coming in to pick up their pellets and, loading up tons of pellets. You'll find on, right before like a cold snap comes in, you'll find a bunch of people who will come in and pick up a ton of pellets and just take the whole ton with them. And we go through like an insane amount of wood burning pellets every year, all year. Even during the summertime, we'll sell them. Alrighty, guys. 2 hours, 20 minutes into this really long live stream. It was a lot of fun. Got 147 people watching with 128 thumbs up. I see we got a super chat from NBB04001. Thank you so much for the $5. Simon, you sell rigid foam boards for exterior wall insulation? I do. This is now code required in cold states. It's pricey. You think it's worth it? Yeah. I mean, I guess like insulation quality of your house is going to be worth it. If you were to be like, say that first house that I had moved into where it had no insulation, single pane windows, it was very difficult to keep that house warm. Like, you could burn through $400 worth of diesel in no time at all. All right, of heating oil was diesel a little different. Anyway, you could burn through $400 worth of heating oil in no time at all, like really quick. And so, the insulation quality of the house would have made a huge improvement if it wasn't so low, right? Like all the energy essentially just goes right out through the wall. And so if you could stop that from happening, well, now you can really, save a lot on the energy efficiency of that home. And so anytime you ever like seal it up just a little bit more, whether you put fiberglass insulation in the wall and then you do another, additional layer of rigid foam insulation on the exterior wall, I mean, talk about the efficiency that starts to come from that. It's quite extreme. I had a friend here's a small example of it. I had a friend who had a Airstream, like one of the old travel trailers, and absolutely amazing. She disassembled the entire thing, like herself, like, and I mean disassembled it, like took the entire thing apart, every single piece of it, all the windows, all the panels, all the entire shell. She pulled it off the trailer, straightened the trailer up, and got that all secured back, supported back in the way it's supposed to be, put the shell back on it, reattached it. When she insulated it, she decided to do it with something called Reflextex, which is a brand name for a ducting insulation. So normally you would wrap it around like, square ductwork in a building or something to insulate the ductwork. And so it's just a real thin insulation. It kind of looks I don't know, it kind of looks almost like bubble wrap, only a little different. It doesn't, like, instead of having bubbles, it's like two layers to it, but it kind of has some space in between, and it's made of foil. And anyway, pretty good insulation for doing ductwork, as far as that goes. Well, she took this and very meticulously lined the entire Airstream with it, right up to the windows, very tight fitting, and she did 2 layers of it. Now, the little tiny, like, this has got to be the tiniest camp stove I have ever seen, right? I mean, it was small. It's like a little tent stove, maybe a little bit bigger than a tent stove, but it was a tiny little wood stove. And when she fired that wood stove up, it would absolutely cook you right out of that trailer. Like, there was, like, you would have to have the door wide open, dumping snow on the outside. With that little wood stove going, that trailer was absolutely hot. But before the insulation, it was very difficult. It was like the shell of it was like almost impossible to keep warm. Like, you could heat it up, but then as soon as the heat source was gone, it was gone too, right? It would just eventually just dissipate away. So anytime you ever increase that insulation value of it, then you're gonna improve everything about, like, the cost of the time it takes, everything that goes into the efficiency of the energy of that house. So is it worth it? Yeah. I mean, over the long run, the immediate cost going into it might be a bit much. You got a lot of money in the product, you got money in the labor, of installing it and all that. So, is it worth it? I mean, in my opinion, it is. But for a lot of people, I can see where the argument against it would be. There's like, how much added insulation does this really do, you know. A guy on YouTube surviving ringworm did his little cabin floor with it. Maybe a big difference. How did I can remember as a 13-year-old boy, we would come home to our house. It would be like below freezing inside the house. And then my dad would have to start the coal stove. Which, by the way, if you had ever tried to start a coal burning stove from scratch, it's a long process. And as a 14-year-old kid, my job was to go out to the coal shed and bring in buckets of coal. Kind of like us here in the Northwest with wood. We didn't have a whole lot of coal here in the Pacific Northwest. Now, I guess they did use it back in the day, like, a long time ago. In the store that I work at, City Lumber, actually sold coal. Like they would sell big gunny sacks of it, like burlap bags of coal. And they had like scale. They would shovel it in there and it came in on a train and it would dump in there. And I just think about that. I was like, man, that was the energy source. Like you either had wood or you had coal. Those were the two things that you used. And like electricity and furnaces and all the other stuff, like those were coming about, but they weren't very common. What was common was a stove that you could put a material into. Wood stove, coal stove, stuff like that. Yeah. All right, guys, my phone is starting to die, and we are 2.5 hours into this live stream. I really appreciate everybody who's joined in on this live stream with 119 people watching and 134 likes. I always like it when I see more likes and I see people actually up in here, so it's very cool that you've hit that like button. Thank you so much for the $7 in super chats. Supporting the Uneducated Economist with those super chats is absolutely awesome. I can never thank you guys enough for all that support. YouTube doesn't always appreciate the Uneducated Economist and the efforts, but you guys always seem to with the support and the encouragement, with not only the super chats but then all the wonderful, nice messages and everything that people have sent me. The comment section, I know here on the Uneducated Economist, is probably one of the best places that you can go to converse about the economics, working class positions, what it is that we are doing every day in order to get through all this stuff. The comment section here is by far the best on the internet. So thank you guys for being here. Thank you for joining in. Uneducated